So, our third key insight is the predator prey connection. The grasslands of the world are a unique ecosystem with their own individual attributes, the most important being that of the predator prey connection. This insight is the key to understanding how these environments evolved and how we as humans can best manage them. In the past, when grasslands functioned properly, there were large herds of grazing animals, and to complement them, pack hunting predators. So just think wildebeest and zebras, complemented by the lions. In Australia, it's large herds of kangaroos and emus, complemented by the dingoes. Um, so these pack hunting predators change the behavior of grazing animals to bunch together for protection. Okay, the larger the herd, the safer the individual. These predators will not enter the bunch to attack the individuals. Instead, they stay on the peripheries of the herd and pick off the weak, the sick, the young, and the old, and the slow. Because of this behavioural change, herds are forced to do the following: dung and urinating concentration, eat as much of the available forage as they can with minimal choosing, and third, constantly move to fresh ground. Okay, without the predator, these behavioural changes do not occur. So, in the absence of predators, animals meander. They pick and choose the best grasses over and over again, resulting in overgrazing and the grasses dying out. Wandering back and forth, creating trailing, dunging and urinating sparsely over a wide area, reducing the ability of dung beetles to effectively cycle the minerals, and reducing the effectiveness of the microbiology coming out of the dung and the urine onto the ground. If it's too spread out, it won't have the same effect. Animals do not push down organic matter onto the soil, and they do not break capping because they slowly and softly move through the environment. So the grasslands are in decline. There's only one naturally functioning grassland left in the world, and that is the Serengeti. Previously operating grasslands include the Great Plains of the Western United States, the steppe of Central Asia, the Karoo, and the Sahara, which are now all deserts or desertifying. And this is quite recent. So here's an example historically called the Trekbock. Quote, "For 3 full days the Trekbock passed the village, and they left the veldt looking though it had been consumed by fire," recounts Lawrence Green in his book, The Karoo. So I want to read a little bit more out of this recount. And so for those of you who don't know, the Karoo is in South Africa and Southern Africa. It is now it is a very desertified landscape, but it wasn't always that case. When the Voortrekkers came up out of the Cape and moving up onto that plateau, there was quite an abundance of animals, as we'll read here in Lawrence Green's book. Quote, "At first there was a faint drumming coming from an enormous cloud of dust, and only the front rank of the springbok, running faster than galloping horses, could be seen. This front line was at least 3 miles long. Hare and jackal and other small animals were racing past the hill and taking no notice of the humans. Snakes were out in the open too, moving fast and seeking cover under the rocks on the hill. The first solid groups of buck swept past both sides of the hill. After that, the streams of springbok were continuous, making for the river and the open country beyond. Then the buck became more crowded. No longer was it possible for them to swerve aside when they reached the fires in the wagon. Some crashed into the wagon and were jammed in the wheels, injured and trampled upon. The wagon became the centre of a mass of dead and dying buck. At the height of the rush, the noise was overwhelming. Countless hooves pounded the surface to a fine dust, and everyone found it hard to breathe. Within an hour, the main body of springbok had passed, but it was not the end of the spectacle. Until long after sunset, hundreds upon hundreds of stragglers followed the great herd. Some were exhausted, some crippled, some bleeding. The trees were reduced to gaunt stumps and bare branches. The buck had brushed off all herbage in their passing. Every donga leading into the river was filled with buck. A donga is a gully. It seemed that the first buck had paused on the brink, considered the prospect of leaping across. Before they could decide, the ruthless mass was upon them. Buck after buck was pushed into the donga until the hollow was filled and the irresistible horde went on over the bodies." So that's just to give you an idea of the scale of herds that used to exist in these grasslands that no longer exist. We don't have them there at all. We do have them in the Serengeti, as I said. That's the last functioning one, and we'll get onto that one soon. But these are human recounts from not that long ago, only a few generations ago, that these herds existed, and human intervention has gone a long way to destroying these herds, and by extension, our non-brittle grasslands. So here's an example in the Sahara. This is like right in the middle of the Sahara in northern Chad, and so this was rock art found in northeastern Chad, estimated to be around 2,000 years old, showing a tribe of herders where there is now only desert. And it is proper desert in the Sahara there right now. It does rain in the Sahara, not as much as what it used to. Of course, there has been some climatic changes over the last 12,000 years, which would have definitely impeded it, but also our management has grossly affected the environment there. Another one is the bison near extinction. So it is estimated that there were nearly 25 to 30 million American bison in the western United States. But after the prolific hunting for political and nutritional purposes, their number dropped to 541 individuals. Fortunately, we now have close to 500,000 bison, which is brilliant because they're a fantastic animal. But as you can see there, they are all bison skulls that old mate's standing on top of there. So they properly wiped out the bison. One for market hunting, because there's a lot of meat on a bison, and if you're a market hunter, you can go out and get a bison and skin it and dress it and take it back to town. You can get a lot of money for that, and people like to eat meat. So that was one of the reasons. The other one was a political reason to starve out the Native Americans, who also used it as their primary food source. So there was two reasons as to why they nearly went extinct. We can see the Great Plains of the United States there. They go right up to Canada and right down to the border of Mexico. And so you can see on the left-hand side where the Rockies are, it is slowly desertifying right back. And this is where those herds would have operated. And sadly today that is no longer the case. A lot of that green you see there will be corn, will be maize, and it won't be sweet corn. It'll be maize for animal feed. Funnily enough, I think there's like $80 billion worth of the maize crop in the United States, which is most of it goes towards feeding animals. Ironically, where we could actually have animals on there, but that's beyond the scope of this little talk. But we can see the environmental effects of what happens when we do take these herds out of the environment. So, a reflection on the decision to eradicate the bison. So there was a problem. The native population of warriors was opposing westward United States expansion. Solution: destroy their food source. The resulting consequences was a genocide, mass wresting of land, causing desertification on a large scale, and no more bison to eat. So we had pretty bad consequences as a result of that linear thinking. The solution: well, we're going to crop with Green Revolution technology, NPK fertilizer, and we're going to set stock cattle. We're going to use the land for whatever we can by throwing on all these different additives and make the land produce something. The resulting consequences were soil erosion, more loss of carbon, nutrient runoff causing algal plumes, etc., etc., etc. Solution: deep rip the fields, disc plow, more fertilizer, herbicides for the excess weeds, and pesticides for the insects. The resulting consequences of still using that linear thinking by we'll just add some more. We are now faced with environmental devastation, a carb and sugar excess in our diet, pesticide and herbicide residue in our food, nutriently deprived food, health issues from the nutrient deprived food, such as nutrient malnutrition, autism, Asperger's, cancer, depression, anxiety, chronic disease, and all these other things that we really didn't have 100 years ago. Solution: big pharma drugs, big subsidies from the government to produce more food, and the resulting consequences is a government corporate system dependent on a destroyed ecosystem. There's a lot of people's jobs and there's a lot of money in this ecosystem of the world not working. There's a lot of money because if you're not sick, they can't sell you medicine. If the land isn't bad, they can't sell you fertilizer. And so there's a lot of interest into making sure that the environment doesn't work, because we would rather profit in this case than do what is right for a lot of people. So, using a linear, complicated paradigm, this feedback spiral will continue. Change to a holistic paradigm, solutions present themselves. So, the problems of bare soil, desertification, nutrient deficient food, herbicides and pesticide contamination, chronic human disease, poverty, dependence on government subsidies, profit for the big end of town, urban drift, ghettoization, conflict, social disintegration, and all the four horsemen. The solution is a functioning ecosystem. That's the root cause of it all. If you had a functioning ecosystem, a lot of those problems wouldn't exist or would be nowhere near as vicious as they are right now. So just on that one decision of the United States government to go, right, we're going to knock all these bison, has resulted in this complicated complex problems that we now face off one decision that didn't consider the whole and that didn't consider a better outcome. But this has been happening for a long time. Many of the deserts occur where sedentary civilization has existed the longest. So we can see Egypt, we can see Mesopotamia and the Levant, we can see Turkey, we can see Spain and North Africa, we can see right to the center of China, Mongolia. We can now see it going into the subcontinent. It's going in from Pakistan down into India, and it's lapping at the borders past Rajasthan right into the middle of India to the Deccan Plateau. I mean, it's really prolific. It's going north into Russia. These large deserts are getting bigger and bigger and bigger, and they weren't like this. They weren't like this because if we have a look at a lot of these old civilizations, they're covered by sand or surrounded by sand, or they're in a desert. How does an environment support a population necessary to create these great big monolithic sites, to create these civilizations? It doesn't, which means that things were working a lot better back then. But due to management, due to catastrophe, these things have disintegrated because mankind has not known how to properly manage them, because we haven't understood the paradigms of holism, brittleness, the predator-prey connection, and, as we'll get on to soon, time. But we can see where it all is now. And we can take a look there. Same down in Southern Africa there, you can see where Lawrence Green's Trekbock excerpt was from, which is now all a desert. Never used to be like that. And now a quick look at the last grassland, the Serengeti. So the Serengeti is the last fully functioning naturally occurring grassland on Earth. It exists in Tanzania and Kenya, and this ecosystem is home to a massive herd of wildebeest and other grazers. And so the herd travels across the Serengeti over the course of a year, and you can just see the scale and the amount of animals that are moving across those grass plains. You can see them. That's a lot of mouths to feed. That's a lot of grass that's going to be eaten. There's a lot of dung that's going to be put on the top there, and the whole ecosystem will be functioning because those wildebeest exist there. If they were to be taken away, guaranteed that would be turning into a desert. So here is a little map of how they move across the Serengeti over the course of a year. So you can see that in April to June, they're there at the top of the river, right next to the big lake, and they move north right up through to August and October, right over to the Kenyan border, and then straight back down again, and then go round and round and round. And they do that every year. And that's how the grazing works in that part of the world. So here's an example from Australia, the dingo fence. So a contemporary example of a predator-prey connection and its effect that it has on a brittle environment, and how a decision made by humans in the absence of the insight of holism and the predator-prey connection can cause environmental devastation. So completed in 1885, the dingo fence was a government project to exclude the native Australian predator, the dingo, from the southern part of Australia. This was done for the purpose of protecting sheep from predation. This resulted in much larger populations of kangaroos and emus and all other things south of the border. Consequently, less forage was available for sheep in the long run, which negated the effects of the fence. So here is where the fence runs from. So it runs on the left-hand side there from South Australia right across to the New South Wales border, shoots straight up to where Queensland, New South Wales, and South Australia meet, Cameron Corner, and goes straight across Queensland, goes right up into Queensland, and then straight back down sort of near northern New South Wales and goes down into New England. And so that's the longest fence in the world, and that kept out the dingo more or less. But what is the results? So here is right at the corner, and you can see on the left-hand side we've got Queensland, where there is the dingo, they exist, and on the right-hand side we have New South Wales. This obviously isn't a too big of a photo, but we can already see that on the Queensland side we've got more standing forage, we've got more ground cover than we do on the New South Wales side. Let's have a look at the next photo. This was a feed cage set up on the New South Wales side to prevent any of the excess kangaroos or grazers getting into that forage and tearing it up, and that's the results. It's incredible. I mean, this is a place with 6 inches of rain, 141 mils. And just by removing the dingo from the environment, we can see the changes in the behaviour of the prey animals. They don't care. They're walking around. They're overgrazing. They're not having to be scared. They're not having to break up the land. And you can see they're just overgrazing it to the point where it becomes bare. Here's a satellite photo. You can see where the border of New South Wales, Queensland and South Australia is, and you can see in this square in the bottom right where the dingoes have been removed, and the lighter spots are bare ground. And then you can see on the South Australian border and the Queensland side it's a lot darker because that is where a lot of the forage is still standing. So just by removing the one predator, we can cause even the most extreme of environments right in the middle of Australia, we can cause the most extreme environments to collapse even further. Truly sad. But if you want to read more, The Conversation has a fantastic article, and there's a link for you. So here is an excerpt from Plato, and I thought it'd be very interesting to bring this one up. The consequence is that in comparison of what was then, there are remaining only the bones of a wasted body. As they may be called, as in the case of small islands, all the richer and softer parts of the soil having fallen away, and the mere skeleton of the land being left. But in the primitive state of this country, its mountains were high hills covered with soil, and the plains, as they termed by us, of Phelleus, were full of rich earth, and there was an abundance of wood in the mountains. Of this last the traces still remain, for although some of the mountains now only afford sustenance to bees, not so very long ago there was still to be seen roofs of timber cut from trees growing there, which were the size of sufficient to cover the largest houses. And there were many other high trees, cultivated by man and bearing abundance of food for cattle. Moreover, the land reaped the benefit of the annual rainfall, not as now losing the water which flows off the bare earth into the sea, but having an abundant supply in all places, and receiving it into herself, and treasuring it up in the closed clay soil, it led it off into the hollows, the streams, which it absorbed from the heights, providing everywhere abundant fountains and rivers, of which there may still be observed sacred memorials in places where fountains once existed. And this proves the truth of what I am saying.